Good evening, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. My name is Justin Drummond, and I am one of the workshop coordinators here with Ohio Educational Theater Association, and I'm also the theater director at Adena High School. And tonight we are pleased to be presenting Social Distancing and Radio Theater in the Pandemic with Tess Burgler from the Ohio Shakespeare Festival. Before we get started, though, I want to go over real quick a couple of upcoming events because we do have some titles for some of our sessions that we had been announced that we had added. So next week we have, I can get my slides to cooperate. Next week we have The Show Can Go On During the Pandemic, live streaming and more with Jim Hoare from Theatrical Rights Worldwide and Jason Goldstein from BookTix. Then the week after that, we have The Show Must Go On Line with Susan Blackwell. And Susan will be discussing her experience working with Orange County School of the Arts on a production of Now Hear This. And just be aware that on the 16th, we're going to start at 8 o'clock to accommodate Susan's schedule. So that will be that session will be 1 hour later. And then the week after that, we have Producing a Virtual Musical with Chad Weddle. And then on September 30th, Gay Jones is going to join us to discuss best practices for virtual world of theater. And then finally in October, we're going to wrap up with a session which is Making Theater Happen Even During a Pandemic, Virtual and Digital Rights and Flexible Season Planning. And that's going to be presented by Rosemary Butcher and Gabriela Morales from Concord Theatricals. So we hope you guys can join us for the rest of those as we go forward. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Mark Zimmerman and Tess and let them kind of introduce what they're going to be doing tonight.
Awesome. Good evening. Thanks for having us here. It's my pleasure to welcome Tess Burgler. She's the managing director of the Ohio Shakespeare Festival here in Akron, Ohio. Tess, welcome.
Thank you. I really appreciate getting a chance to talk about this stuff. It's been, exciting in good ways and bad ways.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to have you here.
You're husky.
Sorry, that's my newly adopted husky, unhappy with being in his crate, apparently. Anyway, so we're going to talk about the radio plays that you've been doing with your theater company and also the socially distanced production you did in your summer space. But let's get some background information first. So let's talk about you, Tess. Tell us a little bit about your background, your education and experience.
Sure. So I went to the College of Worcester for theater and graduated from there in about 2009. I've been working with Ohio Shakespeare Festival since I was 14. Spoiler alert or disclaimer, my parents are the artistic directors, but I did grow up in the theater and have a huge love not only for theater, but for the running of a theater and the management of it. And so for the past about 6 years now, I've been the managing director at Ohio Shakespeare Festival, as well as one of the actors in the primary acting company. We have what I would describe it as an informal resident company of folks that we use often. And other than that, I have huge passion for Shakespeare, particularly classic works in general. I did an independent study if you know anything about the College of Worcester, they do an independent study all senior year, which is basically a thesis that we end up writing. And I did mine all on Shakespeare and original practices, which are basically how we think Shakespeare might have produced theater in his own time and how do you apply that to our time and make the works more accessible. So that's my passion, and I'm super, super lucky to get to do it, even though weirdly right this second, I don't get to do it because our theater is, like most theaters, still shuttered. We did get a small reprieve in the summer because we have an outdoor venue as well as an indoor venue. Indoor venue is still very much closed. We did get to do one show outdoors, very condensed, but more than a lot of places got to do, so we were lucky.
Right, and you've already kind of answered my second question, which was the Ohio Shakespeare Festival has been doing outdoor Shakespeare for a long time on the grounds of Stan Hewitt here in Akron, but more recently has started indoor work. So tell us a little bit about your company's work.
Sure. So Ohio Shakespeare, like you said, has been at Stan Hewitt Hall and Gardens for 19 years now. And the tradition of Stan Hewitt having Shakespeare goes way back before us, and even John Lithgow and his dad were involved in it for a while. And we don't know them at all, of course, it's a different company, but they ever since the Cyberlings lived there, they've had Shakespeare on the grounds, and so we are a continuation of that tradition. We did 2 shows a year outdoors, usually a comedy and a tragedy, always Shakespeare, and then we had the opportunity to move into a historic building in the fall and winter and spring seasons, just 10 minutes down the road. Gorgeous renovated Masonic temple, and it's perfect for classic works with the vaulted ceilings and the Tudor style stuff. So we got real lucky there, and we've been producing year round now for 4 years. And we do a lot of other classics indoors. So whether it's adaptations of classic books or classic musicals, other classic playwrights like Moliere, and even some more modern stuff too.
So like the rest of us, you were in production last March when everything was shut down. So what was happening at Ohio Shakespeare?
Like everyone, we got robbed. So we were right smack in the middle of our production of St. Joan, George Bernard Shaw's show. And we were really proud of it. And it was doing way better than we thought in March, talky George Bernard Shaw play might do. And it kind of felt magical, and then it got snatched right away. And we lost that entire last weekend of it. And we had just 3 days before announced our 2020-2021 season, sold about 100 subscriptions, and then all of a sudden there was a pandemic and no theaters were open for the foreseeable future. So that's what we were doing right smack on March 14.
So like all of us, you sat around and licked your wounds for a while, but then eventually decided we need to get back to work.
Yeah, and we instantly saw, like everybody else, the theaters going virtual, and I think everybody has mixed feelings about that, and I think for good reason, because we're very lucky to have a Zoom platform to be able to reach people in any capacity, but I think all of us agree that it's not theater, and yet it's better than just going dead and sitting on our couches and waiting. And so it's this kind of like world we don't want to be in, but we're making the best out of. So right when the pandemic hit and we closed, maybe like a few weeks, maybe a month afterward, we started what we called Romeo and Juliet Zoom. And that was, we went scene by scene, and we just did regular Zoom theater, the actors in their boxes. And that was when we really started to learn what it's going to be like to produce virtual theater, and how to make it work. And some things were way harder than we thought and way easier, but we did it not because we were trying to produce a show, but because we actually had a bunch of schools reach out to us and say, my students are right in the middle of reading Romeo and Juliet. It's hard to teach that in the best of circumstances. It's even worse now that they are stuck at home, virtual learning with no preparation. So we created that to fill a specific need. And
so that was a live reading you were doing on the air?
We did put them onto Facebook Live, each segment, but we actually recorded them beforehand and ran them live. And that's actually something that we do with our radio plays that I know we're going to talk about in a little bit, that I find so much better than trying to do something live. Still possible, but we actually recorded it just straight through and then would present it live by streaming it. So it was basically live, but just time lapsed.
So there wasn't any editing involved in that process?
In the Romeo and Juliet, there was some editing for that one. In our Dracula radio play, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but in our Dracula radio play, that one was completely unedited and live.
All right. So then that evolved into the radio drama. So let's talk about that.
Cool. So one of the reasons it evolved into radio drama was we were trying to figure out how to still reach our audiences and still produce some of the work we wanted to do and make it a little bit easier on ourselves. So the the very first reason we thought about making it a radio drama was kind of for ourselves and not necessarily thinking of the audience, but it actually went so well and we learned so much about it that I actually think it serves our audiences better. The thing about the very first one we did was Dracula, and we did have the rights to that script because it was actually something that was written for our theater by one of our employees. And so we had done this play several times before, you know, in Halloween time. And then we just said, okay, we have this script, it's ready to go. We also have sound cues that have already been made for the productions that we've done before. Let's see if we can just put that in a Zoom call. And the thing about Romeo and Juliet was the editing that we had to do for that really revolved around the squares and the boxes to get the boxes to go where you needed them to be, to get the characters, because we were trying to make it for students. We wanted very consistent, like Juliet is always here, Romeo is always here. They always have the same clothes on so that it's consistent and easy to follow who they are. But all of that was a lot of extra work for what we didn't feel like was a lot of payoff. It's was good that we did it, but it was a lot of work. So we thought, what if it was just the profile pictures and it just turned into a radio play? And so we tried that out on Dracula and it worked wonders. And a couple of reasons I think it actually is more consumable and reaches an audience better is that it is consumable just via audio. So you don't have to, we all are watching screens so much right now that I think, you know, participating in watching more Zoom screens after a whole Zoom screen day of teaching or work in the office is sometimes not a release, you know, and this is supposed to be a release. It's something for the community. But when you turn it into the radio play style and they don't have to watch the screen, they can put it on their headphones, walk around, you know, make dinner. It's like they consume it like a podcast almost. They can listen to it in the car if they choose to download it and things like that. So all of a sudden we were reaching way more people because it was so much more easily consumable throughout their days. The other thing is that you can only get so creative. You can do some really beautiful stuff, but you can only get so creative in this box. And, you know, does the actor wear a costume or are they wearing something that they own and then we're ignoring the fact that they're in the office, things like that. When you take that away and you just have their voice and the soundscape, all of a sudden the audience has to use their own imagination to create a play in their own head. And so by taking the visual away, you actually give them license to create something bigger than just this little screen. And it is way more engaging in that way, at least for me and at least for the audience that has reached out and told me so.
Yeah. I have a background in radio myself. I think that I got involved in radio with this old-fashioned idea that it was still like that, that you could create this world with sound. And I got into radio and found out that they don't do that anymore. And so I got out of radio and got into teaching, into theater. So I think in a way it's a kind of exciting, this idea of radio drama.
It's a renaissance, just like, and people get really nostalgic about it too. They're like, oh, I've heard, I had the records of the Disney thing when I was young and I would listen to that, or I remember them from when they were actually on the radio and things like that. And you have that little nostalgic piece too.
Right. Well, I think most people don't have actual memories of listening to them. You have to be of a certain age, I think.
Yeah, unless you have Sirius XM and you listen to the classic HD or whatever it is. I loved that channel.
Right. So this script of Dracula, what was this one that you had to license, or did you go back to the source material?
It is not something we had to license, and actually none of our radio plays have we had to license because we commissioned them all in-house. So the first two, Dracula, and then we did our Robin Hood, were plays that we had written for our theater in years past, and we had staged and produced before. And we owned, because they were written by, one was written by our artistic director and the other was written by our technical director. And so these were people in-house. And then after those went so well, Dracula and Robin Hood, we decided that we'd and it was so much easier to produce on our end. We decided we'd just keep doing them until the end of 2020. There was no reason not to. It wasn't really costing us much. We do pay our actors and our authors a minimal fee, but we were able to fund that through a Patreon. And so the project fund itself, it only takes a few days to record. And then on my end, it only takes a week or so to fully get it ready to release. So it was just so easy that we said, why not? And then what we decided to do was, there are a lot of out of work actors. There are also a lot of out of work playwrights. And so who have a lot of time to write right now. And so I reached out to folks that I knew had a passion for writing or who had written plays before, and said, here's my crappy budget. Here's what we're looking for. Are you interested in doing one? And it was mostly yes from the folks I reached out to. What we are doing for our particular radio plays is taking classic short stories like The Monkey's Paw, The Most Dangerous Game, Detective Molly of Scotland Yard, Edgar Allan Poe stuff, and we adapt them into a radio play style. So they're all, they're not, nobody's coming up with brand new stuff every month out the gate, but we are adapting things into original adaptations.
And what's the running time of these scripts?
That's a good question. So the first two, again, were plays that we did. So they were play length. They were about 2 hours long. I think Robin Hood was actually only 90 minutes, but Dracula was about 2 hours. And we do include a little intermission in there. So while those went great, afterward, we talked about, let's make these a little bit more bite-sized. Let's make these a little bit more consumable. And that helps increase our numbers. People are way more likely to sit down and listen to something that's 30 minutes long than to listen to something that's 2 hours long. And so our numbers went up, and also it's easier for us to produce stuff that is a little bit more bite-sized as well. So now we're looking at the sweet spot of like 30 or 40 minutes for these radio plays. And lost that train of thought, but we're looking to 30 or 40 minutes for these particular radio plays, and that's been really doable and has seen better engagement than the longer stuff.
And so you're working with professional actors, so I can assume that it doesn't take as much rehearsal as it would for those of us working with high school actors. So what is that rehearsal process like?
Yeah, so I think that's an important distinction to make, is that I'm not only working with professional actors, but I'm working with actors that I've worked with before. For the most part, we're using our company members that are, of course, out of work because we're closed. And so I know what their strengths are. I know who's going to be able to just knock a part out of the park and get it done. So with that in mind, we have been able to get these down to 2 to 3 sessions, Zoom sessions, to rehearse and record. And in terms of best practices of that, we found that focusing on rehearsing completely without trying to record on the first day is great. Basically like a read through, maybe if the script is short enough and you can go back and reread through it and get some more particular directing notes. Give the actors a few days to think about that, maybe like 2 days, and they look at their script and look over the notes you gave them and things like that. And then they come back and then we rehearse a little bit and then record that little bit and move through the play that way. So for example, when we did The Monkey's Paw, we rehearsed all on a Monday, the whole thing. And then they had till about Thursday where we were going to record. And we would say, okay, here's the first chunk of recording. It's page 1 through 3, just something that made sense to whatever the play needed. And then we would rehearse quickly, just kind of review what that little section was. And then we would just record it. And then if we got the take, great. And we would move on and do that with the recurring chunks of the rest of the play. Little piece of advice that we found out. At first, we were trying to be really good about, we needed to get everything in a full take. You actually don't for the radio play, right? Because we're not here. And so the actors are trained up in rehearsal and reminded before they start recording that if they mess up a line, don't do anything, just stop, go back and restart it, and I can just whoop that little section of a mess up out. It's so easy, and you record things so much more quickly because you can have 5 mess ups in a row and just yank them right out. And you don't have to stop and start the momentum of the scene. So if somebody just trips over their words, they say, and restart the line and just give me a little beat, and then I know just to yank it right out when I'm editing it.
So for a 30 to 40 minute snippet then, or nugget, you said, how many nights are you recording?
Recording 1 to 2, rehearsing. Technically, we rehearse all the days because we review when we record. So you rehearse definitely a full night without any sort of recording, just no pressure on the actors at all. It's just the rehearsal room. And then the next time you come in, rehearse, record. And if you don't get everything done, then you have another day of rehearse, record.
And is there an expectation that the actors are off book?
No, they don't have to be. They can, even actually when they are on screen, they can have their lines right up here, and you can't tell if I'm looking at you or my lines, right? It's all, we're not looking at a place that looks normal anyway, so they can just read their lines if they are on screen, or if they're not off screen, they could just have a book in front of their face, as far as we could tell, you know.
Right. Yeah, I think there is an art to that, a little bit like reading a teleprompter, but
absolutely.
I was working with my students in the spring, recording monologues on a computer screen for the first time, and I remember the note I gave them most often is, you can't look like you're reading, right?
Yes.
It's like I don't necessarily have an expectation that you're going to have this monologue memorized, but I need to not see you looking.
I need you to give me the
here.
illusion. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to be looking at that camera. But of course, if you're doing the radio play, we don't see the actors. So, yeah, so that.
And it's easier to get a clean take because they don't have to like panic for the second thinking if they've forgotten their line or they lost their place or whatever. It's just right there. I will say a quick little piece of very easy and silly advice that I got when we were doing Romeo and Juliet, which was actually with the recording. So I couldn't get over the fact that I was on the screen, and it would be really hard to look at the person talking and not myself, because you need it to be in gallery view and not speaker view, because the characters need to be able to be aware of everybody on the screen just the way they would be aware of everybody in a room. So that means you can see yourself. And so I just have those little envelopes, but you can do it with a sticky note. And you just take it and nobody can tell, but I can just put this right up here on my screen and cover myself up and see everybody else. And all of a sudden I'm not like, wow, is that a booger in my nose? Or, it's a simple thing, but I even do it on business calls sometimes because it's just so weird to see you right there.
That's true. It is the little things, isn't it, that make a difference in this. The screen acting is so much about the details, the way things look and the way things sound. It's a totally different approach, and I think we all have to learn by trial and error a little bit, which you've already done.
Exactly. And so I'm just hoping to share as many of the errors and the successes as possible, and then everybody steal them and share them with everybody else.
Let's talk a little bit about the technical support of this. So you were recording on Zoom? Is that what you were doing?
The actors call into Zoom, and we actually have our technical director who runs sort of all the recording and technical side. He records on what is called OBS. It's a software that is free to download online, and it is way more sound and picture quality than you would get if you were just recording on Zoom like you do a webinar or something. And even like those little fractional differences, especially in a radio play style, really matter, because if you take away the visuals and all you have is the sound needs to be as good as humanly possible, because even if you have just that little tinny little thing that you get even with a good microphone built into the computer, it really doesn't serve the story super well. So using OBS is the way that we record. And so it's it's not, and it's actually how we stream live too, and it's a way better quality stream, and a way more secure one in terms of not getting wires crossed and it cutting in and out. So that's just OBS, and you can download it for free online. I was less than a novice when I first downloaded it. You just look up a bunch of YouTube videos saying, hey, how do I record something with sound only on OBS? Hey, how do I record just a little piece of my computer screen with OBS and get sound and video? All that information's out there, and it's quite intuitive as long as you have even the beginning of a knack for computer stuff. So I totally recommend that.
You used OBS when you were doing, I guess, Dracula, when you were doing the video and the sound?
And now we use it for all of them still. So we used it for every virtual thing we've created, we used OBS.
Right, so the first show, you were doing that kind of as a Zoom production, using OBS to record it, but you were seeing all the individual tiles on screen.
Yeah, so let me show you really quick what that looks like. And that was one of the sort of evolutions of our radio plays that we went through is, here is what OBS looks like when you're streaming, by the way, and that stands for Open Broadcasting Services, if you want to Google it that way. But it's totally free, totally worth your time to learn how to use. But when we were doing our radio plays, we started out with it being a little bit more of a Zoom structure. So if you take a look at our Dracula, it won't have any sound for you, but you don't really need it. You can see that it's a little blurry just because it's not totally downloaded on my computer yet, but you can see that when somebody speaks, their box lights up. So you could actually kind of track every character. And so for the very first one we did, radio play we did, which was Dracula, we had every single character on 100% of the time. And they just muted themselves when they weren't in the scene and weren't speaking. This is actually the guy, this is actually our narrator, and over here, the Dracula radio play is our technical director recording. And so this is where we began. These profile pictures actually ended up being a really cool thing that we did stick with for the most part. We have moved away a little bit, but these were actually from our production of Dracula, so that was kind of cool. You can just use headshots. Let me just give you a tiny bit of a piece of advice. You'd think it was really easy to get these profiles on here, but actually it took sometimes, it was a technical piece that took hours sometimes. What you need to know if you want to do something like this with the profile pictures and the Zoom Live is you have to have it downloaded on your computer. You can't be using Zoom in a web browser. Because for some reason it just won't stick, the profile picture won't stick. And you also have to be signed in. So it's really easy to just open up Zoom on your desktop, even if you've downloaded it, and it just is open. You're not actually signed into your account. And that took us a long time to learn. So don't bother wasting your time like that if you want to recreate this sort of profile picture thing. And of course we changed the character names. And that's real easy to do. You just rename the participant. So then what we ended up changing a little bit for Robin Hood. So Dracula was completely live. That was actually, so the sound effects were done live and everything. Robin Hood, we actually created and had some editing time. So you'll see that we actually only have the people in the scene that are in the scene on the screen. It was a lot more work to do it that way. And I'm not even sure it was that much better. So I don't know, take your pick. There's something cool about that, but it was definitely a lot more work. And we produced it, so we were able to have like, I'm trying to get it here, little scene cards that came in and out to say where we were each time. So that was kind of fun. Not ideal if you are not wanting people to focus on the visuals, like if you want it truly podcast style, consumable just with the audio, but that was not necessarily our goal in this particular one. I'll show you one little weird thing we did. There's a fight between two of the merry men, and we actually had two merry men in the show quarantined together at their house. So we actually have a little moment where we have some live action and they do a real fight. But then we just go right back into, we go right back into the radio play style. It's fun, just because we had the ability to do it, but just know that that's an option to you if for some reason that helped your story. And then the final like progression was turning it basically into really just a radio play. So we have the little introduction here, and you can't hear it, of course, but the narrator is talking throughout all of this. At one point we do introduce the cast and their pictures there. And actually, here's a fun thing we ended up doing a little later in the game. So we actually have local businesses that created old-fashioned radio ads for us, and we use them as intermission breaks or as like, here are our advertising partners right at the beginning. It's fun because you're supporting local business, but also the audience gets a giant kick out of it because it's super nostalgic and silly. So I put their their logo there, and then we do the same thing as a commercial.
Wait, this is a real thing, the Macbeth?
Yeah, it's fun. They
we live in the same town. I don't know this.
Yeah, it's online only, but that's actually one of our acting company members uses. It runs this place, and she makes the soaps, and they are literary inspired soaps and face masks and lip balms and all this organic, really cool stuff. So yeah, the radio ads were a huge hit and a great way to have an intermission. One thing before I forget, in terms of best practices, when we stream these on Facebook, let me see if there's an easy way for me to show you that. Oh no, actually I can just show you through Robinhood. Let me go back. When we stream these through Facebook, we do like to gather an audience before we just start. And so what we did for the last several is you just play this sort of countdown screen. So once we go live, we say we're going live at 7 or something like that. We go live, and then we have a sort of starting in countdown, and there's some music playing behind that that's public domain free. And that allows us to gather most of the audience before we start, because a lot of people are tuning in because they know to tune in, but a lot of people will also tune in because they're following your page and they see Ohio Shakespeare Festival just went live. So that was very helpful in terms of analytics for us.
So just a step back a little bit in the discussion on the OBS, is that the platform that's the platform you're recording on, then is that also the platform you do all the editing on?
No,
that's have to load that into something else.
That's a great question. So I don't do any editing on OBS. Maybe you can, I don't even know if you can, but I know how to stream on it and record on it, and that's it. But I use both iMovie and Audacity. So I have a Mac, the program that comes for video editing on a Mac is called iMovie. It's actually very easy to do some pretty sophisticated sound design in there too. So mostly I stick to iMovie, but also Audacity, which is AUDACITY, I think. AUDACITY. Yeah, it's a free editing software for sound. And it took me, a few YouTube videos to figure out how to do the basic stuff, but once you know how to do it, it's very intuitive, and I could get stuff done pretty quick. So a lot of the time I will create sound effects using Audacity, and then I'll pop it into iMovie and put it exactly where I need it to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've used Audacity for our podcasting for a number of years. At school, my students do theater-related podcasting, and there's always a number of students in class who already know how to do Audacity. So for high school directors, you might want to poll your students to see who's already doing editing on something like Audacity. There's an Adobe program too, Premiere Pro, I think it's called, that I'm just learning how to use in the Creative Cloud suite. So both those things you could use for editing, and they're pretty intuitive. The Audacity is simpler, I think, to use, and it's just sound. The Premiere Pro can be really complicated, but if you choose it to be,
Yeah.
it can also be really simple. So that's good. All right, so you have released these out into the ether, and who's watching them?
As far as I can tell, our audience. So we shoot it out into a mail newsletter that we use to keep in touch with anybody who has subscribed to that over the past many years, and the theater community at large, like in Northeast Ohio, seems to be a little bit tuned into it. So is this a way for us to like get our name out there? Not so much. Is it a way for us to not die in our mind, in our subscriber minds completely? Yes, absolutely. And so, every couple of weeks I'm sending them out an email saying, if you want, we have a new radio play for you to listen to. Really cool thing that I was not expecting when we did Dracula on Facebook Live, and we've done the rest of them on Facebook Live since then, is that the audience gets to comment in real time. And so there's actually, because you lose the audience, right? When you were doing these radio plays and these Zoom performances, the audience isn't there for us to react off of and take energy from and give energy to. But when we put it onto Facebook Live and the audience commented and they were like, oh, I love that sound, or, oh, don't open up that door, and things like that. And then the actors who were watching too, because it's, fun to watch yourself when you're on TV, would comment back. And so there was all of a sudden this dialogue that was happening between the patrons and the artists that we wouldn't have been able to have otherwise. So that, I think, is really valuable too.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. It makes me think, the old-fashioned melodramas would be a fun thing to do too, if you could get that kind of interaction going.
Totally.
So these radio plays, are these things you're offering for free?
Yes. So we have done one digital thing that was not free, and that was not at all a radio play. It was a recorded, a digital performance of our summer production that we were able to reopen for. And that was just, we brought in a video editing team and they shot it, and then we released it for a certain amount of time. If you, so I do have a little bit of experience selling those digital tickets. The radio plays are free because we're thinking of them as a service to the community. But we actually can't give away for free that production from the summer because it was the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged, and we do not own the rights to that. So we had to, get permission to even do the digital production. It had to be a short amount of time that it could be viewed, and it had to be purchased, and it had to have a password that expires, and yada yada. If you want to do stuff like that, rights companies, and I saw that there's the Concord Theatrical is actually coming to talk, so that's cool, and I would absolutely tune into that. But in terms of in general, rights companies really want to work with you in a way that maybe has never been true before in terms of digital and Zoom, licensing.
Well, they have to make money too.
Yeah.
It's just, I think the really stubborn playwrights or descendants of the playwrights that are holding back on these things for whatever reasons. But the playwrights that want to continue to get a royalty check, I think, are making their work available. Yeah.
As they should.
So if anyone who is watching, has questions, feel free to throw those in the chat, specifically about the radio plays, because I want to move on in the discussion now and talk briefly about the live in-person production that Ohio Shakespeare was able to do this summer. As you said, it was the complete works of William Shakespeare abridged, and that was you presented that in your normal summer home, which is outdoors in a park setting here at Stan Hewitt. For those of you who don't know, that's a historical home, the mansion of the founder of Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company here in Akron, right? Long history of Shakespeare plays there. And you came up with a plan that was approved by the Summit County Board of Health, or whatever the title is, right? And you were able to put on a socially distanced play. So tell us about that process.
Well, first we had to even get permission to do it from the Summit County Health Department. And so the first thing we did was sit down for hours and hours and hours and figure out how to submit a health plan that not only would get approved, but that we felt was honestly safe. Because I'm actually of the opinion I isolate like crazy. I'm immunocompromised, and so I really don't do anything. And if we were going to open the theater, I was not going to do it frivolously or even, mildly like, oh, the benefits outweigh the risk kind of. That was not on the table. So what we did was choose complete works of William Shakespeare abridged because it's only 3 people. And I will say that a lot of the things we ended up doing, I don't necessarily think are very easy to recreate, but I will still tell you what we did. And then you can see, what of that you can pull from. And so one of the things we did that is not easy to recreate is we actually had all of the actors and the director, which was me, living in the same household. And so we were a quarantine bubble. And so at rehearsals, it was only us, and we lived in the same household. I was the only person backstage that served as the stage manager as well. So it was just 4 people who already were isolated together. So in that capacity, it was very safe. The nice thing about that is that we didn't have to worry about social distancing backstage at all. It would have been, I think, very hard to do that. And it was only 3 people and me. But the show lends itself to the comedy of the moment and the strange times that we are in, because it is a just totally, vaudevillian sort of silliness, 3 people trying to tell all of Shakespeare's shows in 90 minutes and not doing it necessarily very well either. And so it's a comedy in that capacity, but we were able to social distance on stage, however, just because I thought that would be fun, and it would be kind of a fun gag to have throughout the whole show. So the actors actually never got anywhere within 6 feet of one another while they were on stage. We even actually painted a checkerboard onto the stage of different colors so that you could see the 6-foot boxes, and they would have to kind of bounce around in those to keep away from one another. And it was very fun. And in the moments where we didn't want it to be distracting, it wasn't very distracting. And in the moments where we wanted to call attention to it because it was funny, it was funny. So that was pretty successful, actually, the on-stage social distance. A couple of the other things we did, it was actually a lot easier to keep the audience safe, especially because it was outside. We had the same sort of checkerboard squares out in the audience on the grass, and there were 4 people to a bubble, and then there would be 6-foot by 6-foot boxes all around that bubble, and then another little group and 6-foot by 6-foot boxes and another, and so on. We have I'm happy to go through all of what we did, but I also have a document that I can give you to look at all of the health precautions that we took. Some of the highlights, and I'll share that link here in a moment, but some of the highlights of it were UV lighting for sanitizing was a lot easier backstage than trying to spray and wipe down everything, because not every prop is non-porous and you can just spray it with 409 and wipe it down all the time. So we actually had medical grade UV wands that you could run over it and sanitize it. You actually could, and I worked on doing this, but it was just not something I was interested in for myself backstage, but we even talked about mounting it on the prop shelf, and every time a prop was put back, you just click it on and it goes on for the 10 seconds it needs to be on, and then it's off. You can have multiples of props and things like that back there. We, of course, required masks coming in. You could take off your mask when you were in your seat, but the second you left your seat for any reason, the mask went back on. Having a house manager who really took that seriously and did it in a kind but very consistent capacity was huge. You can't just expect the audience to do it themselves, even if they have the best of intentions. It needs to be something that is monitored and enforced, or otherwise you're not, being truthful to your patrons. You can't just say masks are required and then good luck, hope you wore a mask. And then, yeah, let's see. Those were some of the major things that made that work. And we were really, really lucky.
I wish I had thought ahead to, find the picture. I think it was in the local paper that showed the audience seating there for that production, but I didn't do that, so sorry I mentioned it.
That's okay. Actually, if you talk for a moment, I think I could grab it for you.
So what's the seating capacity down there normally?
Around 350
Okay,
outdoors.
and then the capacity under the social distanced.
It was less than 25%. So I think it was, we never sold over 70, but not, 70 was like the peak. So a lot of the time it was 69 or, 64 or something like that, depending
Well,
on, because you
yeah,
had to get your bubbles correct as well. So it was a
right.
little harder than
Well, it
normal.
would be hard to sell out because you could never predict how big the group was
Yeah,
inside the bubble, right? So one
exactly.
family unit was in this square, but how would you know
Exactly.
in advance how many people were going to be in that particular?
Well, and we were able to do that a little bit, but the nightmare scenario that we luckily never ran into was that if you have a bunch of singles show up, that's going to be the problem. And here I actually found the image, so I'll share it with you real quick. But if I had 70 singles show up, I would have a big problem. But luckily that doesn't tend to happen in theater very often, and it did not happen to the point where it affected us. But you can see you can have 4 people in a square, and then you have the full 6 feet boxes around them empty as well. And one person could have a square, or it could be 4 people. We also had it where if it was, we didn't sell more than 8 tickets together. If you had a party of 16, that's fine, but you're sitting 8 and 8. And that was made very clear when you purchased, and people were totally fine with that. So let's say this group had actually been a group of 8. And so what would have happened is they would have had this bubble and this bubble. And that means that this entire bubble around them would have been empty. And our house manager actually would put the chairs in and remove the chairs as the bubble was filled or not.
And between shows, you would have to clean these chairs thoroughly.
Yep, 409 and a good rub down, and luckily, again, it was outdoors. So the sun, them sitting in the sun all day, was a huge disinfecting piece as well.
How difficult was that to get this plan through the health department?
Once we had the plan and once we knew where to send it and who to contact, it wasn't very hard. We waited like a week for response, and they said that it was very thorough, and they didn't need to see any adjustments. In fact, there were some things they said, you can take these off, you don't have to do them, and we kept them anyway. But the reason that went so well, though, is because we actually have somebody on our board who works in the health. I'm going to forget her actual title, but works in the health management at ExxonMobil. And so she makes documents like that for a living. And so she knew exactly what they wanted to hear. We pulled up all of the, governor's orders, because technically then outdoor theaters were allowed to open, but there were no mandates like there are right now with that DeWine just released. But for theater. And so what we did was go with museum and retail business. And we did both of what you had to do to open up for those. And Stan Hewitt Hall and Gardens is a museum, so that actually did work for us.
Oh, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that. Since that's considered a museum, so it kind of has a different set of rules.
It was a weird, not necessarily loophole, but a weird path that we were able to take to get there.
And so you were charging admission for this production, but because the audience capacity is so small, I assume that was not really like a money maker, right?
It wouldn't have been, but Stan Hewitt kind of bent over backward to help us out, knowing we wouldn't be able to sell what we normally sell. So they worked with us in that capacity, and we were able to, make it a little bit. It was the whole goal of the season was break even, do a show. And we were actually able to make the tiniest bit back on it, simply because Stan Hewitt reduced the rent a little bit for us, because they knew we were in a tough place. And we can't give them enough credit for that, because I know most theaters have rent to pay still, and almost nowhere are they saying, oh, you owe less now, or you don't owe it.
Yeah.
Almost nowhere.
But I think the advance press was saying that it was budgeted just to break even.
Yes. And that was definitely true when that went to press. They hadn't changed our rent agreement yet, but then they did, and it was great.
So really it was just about, getting the work done in a safe environment, putting your actors to work, having something for your company to do, and
Yes.
not just sitting idly by.
And
But
the service of it too, right? Because we had a lot of people come out and say, this was the first thing I could do this summer, because it truly was socially distanced. It truly was outdoors. The masks were enforced, things like that. And so suddenly people who had been isolated for a long time got to go out and do something, and also something social, because while we were socially distanced, it was a social community experience. And I haven't had one of those except when I was stage managing that show since March. And it was, it matters to mental health wise to our community. And also something we were trying to do is learn ourselves in a safe environment, because we knew that doing it outdoors would be profoundly more safe than doing it indoors. And so if we could learn in a safer environment, that would be better for us whenever we can reopen indoors, because we've already gotten a chance at it.
I assume no receiving line at the end of the performance.
Nope. The actors actually did stand on the stage kind of toward the, upstage center and waved at folks as they left. And they were able to say, thank you, or that was so much fun as they left. Another thing we did was have the actors dismiss the audience in sections. So it was like, this section may go, and then the actors would kind of stand there and make jokes or maybe chat with the people in the front row or something at a distance, and then the second section would be able to go so that they could socially distance as they left.
Any thoughts about continuing this or finding a way to do this in your indoor space into the fall?
It's yes and no. It's so interesting. We are, one thing that we have said across the board is that we're not willing to do it if we can't get the same amount of safety and guarantee. You never have any guarantee in life, but the same sort of safety protocols that we were able to do outside inside. And so everything that we're reading right now is that being inside with people is just still way more dangerous than being outside with people. And keeping the actors safe as well as the audience inside becomes a whole different thing. And so we talk about it every single week at our employee meetings, and what can we do, and here are the creative solutions, but we're not going to do something that is a weighing of risk and reward. We're going to do something safe, and it might not be safe until it is solved. And maybe it will be, and who knows, but we're not going to do something reckless indoors.
Right. I mean, I think that's something we're all looking at, is trying to figure out how to keep everybody safe, but continuing to practice our art form. So it is a struggle. So this production of the complete works, this is the one that then you had professionally recorded and edited and whatnot, and you made that available online for consumption.
I am responding to a question over here in the chat. Say that one more time. I'm so sorry.
I'm not seeing that.
I'm just typing out.
I see it now.
Mm-hmm. I was just saying, so is the question about, have you thought about doing book readings? What are the logistics for that? We have thought about it. Actually, we have, I'm not going to spoil it coming up, but we have something a little holiday themed more in December coming up in that capacity. But you want to make sure, of course, that the book is in public domain. And if it's not, definitely don't do it. You can't just pick up a Neil Gaiman and read it and produce it with your theater. But if you do want to do something that's not in the public domain, reach out to the author. They're really generous right now. Everybody is kind of bending the rules. So I actually saw somebody reached out to, it might have been Neil Gaiman actually, now that I say that, on Twitter, and say like, hey, I'm trying to read stories for kids at bedtime and I'm out of material. And he just tweeted back, use my stuff. And so I'm not saying that'll happen to any of us, but it could. You might as well ask.
Yeah, there's no harm in asking. And I know that's what the reps at Concord are saying is that even a play that's not on the list of available for streaming, but that you should still ask,
Yeah.
because they just have to go to the rights holders and ask if that's available. Okay, so you made this video of Complete Works, and then you made that available, right? So that was something that people paid for. So what platform did you use for that?
Cool. So yeah, we did have the digital performance that you could purchase of Complete Works. So I think it was only like $10 with an option to pay full price for a ticket if you wanted to donate that. But we sold the actual tickets through our box office software, just the one we always use. And that was just the way we collected the money and got the list. And they just needed to make sure that they included their email address in the checkout. And that was just, in red letters, made real clear. And then what we did was we used Vimeo, Vimeo.com, and we uploaded the digital performance that we actually had a video crew come in to do. We did not, just hold up a phone and hope for the best. But and sometimes though, if you got the right phone and the right stabilizer, that is a totally legitimate option. But we uploaded it to Vimeo, had a password for it, and then we had a 48-hour window where we said, once you purchase this ticket, we'll send it out on whatever it was, August 8th or something, and then you have 48 hours to watch it. And actually, I put a little cushion on there, so I think it was available for more like 60 hours. But the password was only good for those 60 hours, and we told them it was 48. And so they could watch the show as many times as they wanted, over that 48-hour period, as long as they had that password. It is an honor system kind of thing. We did say, please realize that you purchased this just for your household, and that if another household wants to watch, we ask that you support the artists and the playwright by purchasing the appropriate amount of links. There's no way to make sure that's happening. You just kind of have to do your best. And then after 48 hours, that password expires and they can't have access to the video anymore. But actually you still do as an archive, so that as long as that is okay with the production company that you purchased the rights from, then you still have your archive there too, which is nice.
Yeah, and I have heard from production companies that, if you should magically happen to have an archival video of a show that you've done in the past, that you can often secure permission to run that online and for money. But so you told me earlier that you did okay with that you made back the investment on that.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what it was in terms of once we paid the video company and once we paid the production rights, we definitely broke even, maybe a couple dollars over that. But we, again, thought of that as a service. We knew that just because we were making things safe, that didn't mean that everybody who wanted to come would feel like they could come because of whatever personal needs that they have for their distancing. So we didn't want to say like, well, come see the show, and if you don't, sorry, you're stuck at home. We didn't want them to feel left out in the cold. So even though we had the in-person option, we made the digital option available because we don't want to shut out a whole part of our community just because, they're older or they're immunocompromised or whatever.
So do you have a sense for who the people are that were buying those tickets? Again, just like your normal subscribers?
I got the sense that it was our normal subscribers, and the outliers were like family of the actors that were far out of town and would never have gotten to see the show otherwise. But I also did have, or like college friends of theirs and things like that wouldn't have been able to come into town.
Okay, good. I gave no thought today at all about how to end this discussion. So
well, I actually, if you don't mind me just popping in, there were a couple, if we just go back in time for a second to like radio play stuff in terms of just like best practices stuff to just, for folks doing that, I just will say I'm super quick. The lack of visuals really helps we talked about that a little bit more. So use that to your advantage, use those profile pictures and stuff. the pacing of the speaking matters so much more when you take away the visual. I don't like slow theater to begin with, but if you take away the visual and they're speaking slow and they're not picking up on their cues, and I mean like tight cues, it is deadly. So those, they really have to be picking up on cues and keeping the pace moving along and moving the story forward, or else it gets deadly quick. The soundscape is your set, is your costumes, is everything. So have a lot of fun with that. When you pull those sound effects, make sure that you have the right to do that. A lot of free stuff on YouTube that is public domain and that you can use, but make sure that, you know, it says sometimes give credit to this sound effect designer if you're going to use this in something. You can also purchase subscriptions to places that make sound effects, and so that would work too. We talked about Audacity. Also, I know when talking to a lot of teachers, so something you can do to extend this project, if you're trying to make this, you know, take up a semester or something like that, is have them write the radio play. I would have my students, when I taught middle school, write their fall and spring play, and it was actually a really beautiful way to show the very beginning of a theatrical process all the way through to completion. It can be original, they could adapt it, whatever you want. Oh, if there's, since there are other radio plays out there, we're definitely not the only theater doing pandemic radio plays. If there's a script you like, again, just ask. I actually had I don't even know where they were from, but I had somebody reach out through the Ohio Shakespeare website that was a teacher and said, can I use this Monkey's Paw script for my classroom? And I just worked with them, and it was super reasonable price. And basically I was more interested in just making sure they didn't, you know, give it to other people. But I absolutely made that happen. And I know other places would too. And like we said, keep it shorter or serialize it. So we actually are planning to do around Christmas time an adaptation radio drama of Christmas Carol, but we're gonna so that would be like about like an hour and a half, 2 hours long. We're gonna serialize it, so we're gonna do it chapter by chapter,
Right,
so that it's
that's
still
going back to the original too, right? Because
exactly.
the original was serialized in the newspaper.
Yep. No,
not-
totally. Yeah, and so just those are the best practices in terms of, oh, and microphones. That's the other huge thing, is that we actually, the theater bought a couple of these headsets. If you have that in the budget, great. For the students who can't afford an external microphone like this, it makes a big difference in terms of the sound quality. Even just like the Apple or earpods that have the little microphone in it, way better than just talking at your computer in terms of sound quality. And we let whoever needs it, we just sterilize it and mail it to them, and then that actor gets to use it for that particular radio program. A lot of people right now in the pandemic have their own too, so if they have one, get them to use it.
Yeah, I think those are great best practices, a great advice for all of us to use while we're figuring out what we're doing.
Yeah.
So Justin, I don't know if there's anybody that needs to chime in or ask any additional questions, but
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, now's the time to raise your hand and we can kind of let you ask it live instead of having to type it if you want. But if not, we are after 8 o'clock, so we'll kind of give it a little bit. And if not, we'll start signing off. Tess, thanks. This was a lot of really interesting and good information to use. Like I've got my notes over here I was taking while you were talking. So
Awesome.
So yeah, it's very interesting. There was one thing, freesound.org is free sound effects that podcasters use. And I know that was been going around. So if you're looking, and it's just crowdsourced. So people can put up sound effects as they make them. And so that's a good resource too that you can look into. So I don't think it looks like anyone else has any questions. So I guess next week we'll be having a discussion on licensing and with theatrical rights worldwide and BookTix. And I know BookTix will be talking about their platform for hosting your video productions and things like that as well. So, so yeah, definitely next week, if you have licensing questions, we're going to have them in here helping us out.
Awesome.
So, well, I guess we'll see you all next week. Thanks, Tess and Mark.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.